First, I'd like to thank everyone here for making this such an amazing success. And I'd also like everyone to know that we will have, all of this has been videoed, 3-camera video, and it will be edited and available and given out for nonprofit purposes, and it will be available on our website. So please, 911hartford.org. And if you'd like us to send you an email updating you, there's a list on the desk. So without further ado, someone that probably doesn't need an introduction, former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney.
Thank you very much. I wasn't really expecting to get the microphone, you know, because I came here for the same reason you came here. I will start by saying that our president, or P-resident, during the campaign was asked a question about his technological expertise when it came to cyberspace, clicking around in cyberspace. And he said, I click around. Well, I just happened to be clicking around, and I saw in my inbox a notice about this conference that was taking place today. And then at the very end of the announcement, there was a name, Dr. William Pepper. And there was no way that I could be somewhere in the vicinity and not be here to hear Dr. Pepper. So I was about 2.5 or 3 hours away, not exactly in the vicinity, but I had to come here. And then I was given the task of introducing a man who has done so much to shed truth. And that's what you are here for, to find out and to discover the truth. Because one thing we know is that our own government has failed to tell us the truth. Now, my first interaction with William Pepper came as a result of the fact that I am a mother, and I was concerned about the future of my son. I wanted my son to be able to grow up in this country and to enjoy whatever his talents would allow him to become. But it seemed that there was always something that got in between some successful role model and our consciousness or conscience. And so I began to ask questions. And the main question I asked was, why is it so hard for people who have conscience and values to be successful in the political marketplace? And why is it so easy for people who sell out to reach all of the riches and fame and, of course, get reelected time after time after time? I came across what I believe is the answer to that question. It's COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program. We are what we are because it was meant to be. And then I became very involved with the King family because I increasingly understood that everything that my son had been taught in school about the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a lie. So now if they could lie about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., what else could they lie about? Well, we're learning. But as a result of just me trying to get to the root of things or try to understand what makes our country run and actually who it is that's running our country, I became involved with Dr. Pepper. And he appeared in perhaps the most moving and most enlightening brain trust that I had while I was a member of Congress, and that was on the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And I didn't really know that Dr. Pepper was a 911 truther. But now, of course, I understand that too. When we start out with a reading of Operation Northwoods, we know that then the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. or any other murder is perfectly within the capacity of malevolent forces who might at any time seize control of our government. And it is up to us, after we learn the truth, to do something about it. And so Dr. Pepper is a vehicle for truth. So I have been given the pleasure of introducing Dr. Pepper as that vehicle of truth. And then finally, I would say this. Our first president, in his farewell address, warned us about the false patriots. He said to us, beware the false patriots who would wrap themselves in the flag while at the same time usurping our very values. So Dr. Pepper is one of those true patriots. You are the true patriots. And you, through your pursuit of the truth, will be able to protect us from those false patriots. I want Dr. Pepper to come and give me some more enlightenment and to enlighten all of us, because he is a very well-studied man. Thank you. I love him.
I think I should leave now. I never like to follow Cynthia McKinney. There's some people who you just simply don't like to follow when you're speaking, and Cynthia happens to be one of those people. Reverend William Sloane Coffin was another of those people. I remember I was in dread fear when I had to follow Bill Coffin up at a conference up at Harvard, because I regarded him as the most articulate American in my time. And but that's the way it is. Cynthia tells the story of a pursuit of truth and how people get corrupted. And it's a very difficult question to answer, what happens to people along the way and how they get led astray. Some people we've known for many years and trusted, and then we find something happened to them. You know, years ago when I was considerably younger, I dated Nelson Rockefeller's daughter for my sins. And well, it started out, I had developed an educational program. I gave up politics at all when they killed Martin. I just walked away for a number of years and did some other things, and one of them was in an experimental school, and Annie had a child and wanted to enroll him, and we didn't take him or didn't think it was a good idea, but I came to know that family, and Nelson pulled me into his study. I used to go up to Baconico fairly often. He pulled me into his study one night, and he said, Bill, you know, we all like you very much. I said, well, that's good, Governor, thank you. It was in the mid-'60s, he was governor. Thank you, Governor. He said, and everybody here would like to see you become part of this family, but go on and go into politics, because we think you have a following of people that will come with you. I had handled Bob Kennedy's campaign in '64 when in Westchester County, and didn't like Bob Kennedy much, frankly, at the end of that, but he had changed, I think, 4 years later. He was quite a different guy. So I said, well, Governor, thank you for the compliments, but I'm really not interested in politics. I think politics, the way it's conventionally run in Western democracies, somehow is a fraud and a farce. And you're self-accepted, of course. I think you mean well, but nevertheless. Yeah. He said, no, you really should think about it, but you would have to change some things. I said, what's that, Governor? He said, well, you know, there's this guy, his 8th Ward councilman, and when I had taken control of a city, as never run for office, but as a citizen's chairman, and he said, you know, you really are after Anthony Picone, aren't you? You should really give him a break. And I said, but Governor, he's a crook. You know, I mean, he's just a crook, Governor. And the governor looked at me and he looked up, he's a little, sort of little guy. He said, well, but he's our crook, Bill. So that says it all. That said it all to me. I said, well, Governor, you really like me? He said, yeah, we really like it. Good, then I want you to continue to like me. So I'm going to stay the way I am. I'm not going to change, Governor. You might not like me if I change, you know. He didn't quite know what to say to that. And the meeting broke up soon after. But it is a temptation. It's a difficult problem, Cynthia, particularly in a country as materialistic as this and as competitive as capitalism makes one's culture. It's very difficult to fight that good fight. You've been fighting it for a number of years, and so have a number of our secular saints, as I like to call them, people like Pete Seeger, for example, who just never gives up either. But I'm pleased to come here and to see you, as I have in other parts of the country. I kind of feel humbled in many ways because I'm not a researcher of 9/11. I've never done any investigation. I've never examined any of the serious questions firsthand, and I've relied on the work of others. But I applaud that work that's gone forward, and I applaud the interests of people like yourselves, whom I've met in San Francisco or Chicago and of course New York. And I really want to earnestly urge you to continue what you're doing, because that's what you're doing is what citizens should do in a republic, and what a government that's increasingly moving toward fascism will not want you to do. So you have to do it. You have to continue, and you have to struggle. And I admire you for that. And please don't give up. Write, produce films, hold conferences like this. Try to spread this word to the extent that you can, even into other socially oriented organizations, and try to get them to have their awareness heightened. And that's a very difficult thing to do. I know it is. But one of the problems with the movement for social change in America forever has been the departmentalization and almost the isolation, the separation of one group from another. I had lunch with another friend of ours, Ramsey Clark, about 2 weeks ago, and I said, Ramsey, he's a poster boy for the, as you know, for the ANSWER group, the anti-war group. I said, Ramsey, this has gone on too long. We've got to bring all of these groups together. People like you and Cynthia, are cut the same way in terms of these 9/11 people across the country. And it's only when this movement gets consolidated, it's only when this movement unites that's really going to have the kind of strength that it needs to have. So I urge each and every one of you in your relationships with these people and other organizations to try to bring them in, try to bond with them to the extent that you can. Now I'm going to caution you, and this is like a broken record for people who've heard this before, and if people have heard some of the anecdotes, some of things I'm going to say before, please, I apologize, but there are points that I use that I want to make to you, and they come from personal experience, and this word of caution does as well. And everywhere I speak, again, it's the broken record reference, but I think it's very, very important that you understand this. This movement throughout the country, whether it's here, wherever the chapters, the branches are, whether they're in Atlanta or San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York, is targeted. You will be infiltrated. There will be government people who will come in, who will try to become a part of your movement, and sometimes they will have very radical and very crazy ideas to put forward to the group. They're provocateurs. And for people who have not been politically active over the years, have seen this phenomenon, that all governments do it, it becomes a bit of a shock when the light dawns. So it's very important to be wary of that and to be cautious. That doesn't mean you're being suspicious of your neighbor. It means that you think for yourselves about what you believe in, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. The most extreme example of provocateurs and provocation that I've experienced was in Chicago on Labor Day. in Chicago in 1967, where we held the National Conference for New Politics, and I was executive director of that at Martin King's request. I had been a journalist in Vietnam, as some of you know, and I had come back from Vietnam, having been shot down in a C-130 crash landing, and had to come back for some treatment. But they were happy to see me go because I was never at the 5 o'clock follies. I was always out in the shelters and orphanages out in the country trying to see what was going on. So I took photographs that eventually appeared on utility poles all over the world, showing burned children and shrapnelized pregnant women and things of that sort that Americans, of course, had never seen before. And Martin King subscribed to a magazine called Ramparts. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember Ramparts. But Ramparts ran an article that I wrote in the February, I believe it was February or January issue of 1968. Martin read it, 67, and Martin read it and asked me then to work with him, open all the files I had, which I did, and he wept when he saw some, literally wept when he saw some of the devastation. And then for that last year of his life, only the last year, but for that last year of his life, we worked on, there were two projects, and one primarily was a ticket, a third-party King Spock ticket, and the National Conference for New Politics brought 5,000 delegates from all over the country. Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party people were there, the Sane Nuclear Society from the center left all the way to the radical SDS groups, Hayden and those folks were there. And it was a threat to the Johnson administration, without any question, because Dr. King was who he was, and Dr. Spock, of course, was very popular with whole other segments of the community. And so here we're having this opening night in this convention. Dr. King is to keynote it, and I introduce him and then sit down, and he's into his speech, and someone passes a note over my shoulder to me. And I looked at this note, and it said, "Get him out of here as soon as he finishes speaking, or we will take him hostage and embarrass him before the world." Now that note was given to me by one of the members of a group called the Black Caucus. The Black Caucus had been formed, and they were organizing every black delegate to the convention to go into a special caucus, which in terms of its purposes and stated goals was fine. But what we were to learn years later was that Black Caucus was, in fact, being honchoed by Blackstone Rangers and gangs and gang leaders and people who were on Daley's poverty payroll for the precise purpose of breaking up the convention and splitting it. So we had no idea about this. So Dr. King finished his speech, and we had to get him out of there. The risk was too great with these people. The rest of the convention was wrecked because one resolution after another was introduced with the precise purpose of dividing one organization against another and splitting apart that movement. And Dr. King was a unifier, and he had to be removed so that division could take place. So that kind of activity goes on. It goes on today, and I just ask you to please to be aware of it and look out for it in terms of your own work. Now, I guess one of the tasks that I undertake in these kinds of sessions is to bring 9/11 into a much broader context, because it could be very easy for people who are for the first time becoming politically active and who are outraged about the atrocity of 9/11 and government malfeasance and cover-up and all the rest of that, to see 9/11 as standing alone. Well, it is a seminal issue. In our lifetime, maybe the most important seminal issue, no question about it. But you have to see it in a total context of governmental operation to understand. This is not the first time that government or governments try to put people under stress and anxiety and justify oppression where they deprive liberty and deny a constitutional, even its very existence in some instances. This is not the first time that's happened, and it's not the first time that it's been attempted to be happened. Cynthia mentioned Northwoods. Many of you may know what Northwoods is. Some of you may not know what Northwoods is. Northwoods, of course, was Admiral Lemnitzer's grand plan to have United States Special Forces operatives dressed as and impersonating Cubans in a variety of city streets and killing, selectively killing Americans to justify the invasion of Cuba. That was in 1959. Lemnitzer worked that plan up under John Foster Dulles. Well, of course, it was put on Kennedy's desk, and when he was elected, and he said, "What are these guys, nuts? Are they crazy? What's going on with these idiots?" And of course, Kennedy threw it into threw that plan into the wastepaper basket. Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City is another example, I think, of a situation where there was $3 billion locked in counterterrorism legislation, had been locked there for a period of time, had been blocked, had not been allocated. Oklahoma City bombing takes place, the building comes down, all that money gets released, and there are jobs for the boys and money for the well-connected and the cronies as a result of that. You know, McVeigh blew the front off that building with his fertilizer, and he thought he did it. He thought that he actually did it. When I was in London, somebody sent me this these rolled up sheets of paper, and I assumed when I looked at it that it was being sent to me by a member of the Corps of Engineers who had a conscience and who was concerned and who had participated in the wiring. Because when I went through it, it was the wiring plans for that building. And even today, as time lapses, people will come forward and say, yes, you know, I remember engineers running in there to take out unexploded bombs. So that was another example. World Trade Center 93, I mean, the FBI organized that whole operation. That's not even denied now. And they even said to the guys they entrapped, don't worry, these are not real bombs. So governments do these things, don't they? In Russia, I was in Moscow around the time that the apartment buildings, I don't know if you recall that, there were apartment buildings blown up. And the word immediately went out from the Kremlin that it were the Chechens. And that they used that as a means and as a rationale for invading Chechnya and doing what they have done to the Chechen people and to what was once a formidable city, Grozny, just destroying it. And at that point in time, friends of mine there said very clearly, this is an intelligence operation, this is an inside job, and they're about this in order to get into Chechnya and to use it for that purpose. There is the Berlin Disco. I mean, the Berlin Disco was laid at Gaddafi's door, like many things are laid at Gaddafi's door. We change scapegoats, don't we, from decade to decade. And of course, Gaddafi has been a major scapegoat, and so Berlin Disco was laid at his door. But the German authorities had no hard evidence at all that the Libyans were involved. And that was used as a reason for the shelling, the missile shelling of Gaddafi's home in Tripoli, and the killing of his 4-year-old daughter. When I went to Libya with President Chavez, we went through that demolished residence of Gaddafi's, and he hadn't touched a slab of cement. He left it just exactly the way it was following the bombardment and the loss of his daughter. So we have those situations, and in an imperialist way, what do we need to look at? We stole half of Mexico, didn't we? Huh? We had Polks found a reason to justify the invasion of Mexico, and voila, we have Arizona and New Mexico, Texas, good parts of Southern California, and the Mexicans lost half of their country. We did the same thing with rationalized the taking of Cuba in 1898, the ejection of the Spanish in the Spanish-American War, and then we were going to return it. We're going to leave. One petty dictator after another gets put in there and supported and sustained by us until, of course, Fidel comes down from the Sierra Maestra and changes that whole scenario. But how much later? 59 years later, almost 60 years later, did he do that? Well, we've done that. We've done that to the Hawaiians as well. There is a serious problem historically in this country about the use of imperialism and the use of political assassinations and the use of overthrows, one after another. That's all kept from you in school. It's kept from us in school. Did you go? I grew up never hearing about any of these things. I'm sure that most of you shared that experience. We have to somehow learn about it on our own eventually. So we have supported oppressive tyrants throughout this hemisphere. Some of the worst in Central and South America. Argentina and Chile are particularly bad horror stories. But that's all pre-Chavez. Chavez is having an impact on the culture of that continent now. Yes. Well, there's so much righteous indignation on the part of these, justifiably on the part of these people. We overthrow Mossadegh, who's a secular leader, elected leader in Iran. A marvelous guy, but a nationalist. And he wants the Iranian people to have the benefit of Iranian oil. So Anglo-American oil has got to leave. So we overthrow Mossadegh. We get him out and we put the Shah in because now he'll make the proper deals in terms of the oil and energy interests. Then we go in the next year to Guatemala, had elected president, Joaquim Arbenz, and we do the same thing for Arbenz. We overthrow him. And Guatemala has been a nightmare, hasn't it? Ever since. To this day, it's a nightmare. Tomorrow, Molina may be elected president. He was trained at the School of the Americas. He's an American-trained fascist torturer and murderer who now may be elected president once again in Guatemala. So this horrific story goes on and on and on. We support in every way, subsidize in every way, transnational corporations, particularly the agro-corporations, send them into the hemisphere, let them destroy the economy, the agricultural economy of these people, literally destroy it so that the farmers and their children have to move into the cities and try to find fabricating or other kinds of jobs because they can't compete with American products that are being imported to places like Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. So we destroy their economies, and then when they try to come north to find jobs to feed their families, we have this outrage about these immigrants trying to come here illegally, and that double standard is just incredible. It's incredible. So 9/11 relates to all of these things. 9/11 relates to the destruction of the working class in this country. It relates to internal economic problems that are rising faster than the masters here might want them to. And through radicalizing and making people aware of the 9/11 issue, I think it's maybe very well in line for that swath to be cut quite away. We've incarcerated, how many? Over 2 million now, isn't that right, Cynthia? Over 2 million people. Large percentages, of course, are black and Hispanic. Overwhelming, what is it now? Over 90%, I suppose, are on drug-related charges. Medical problems by the rest of the world, but criminalized in the United States. And yet the United States has been historically the largest drug-dealing, drug-trading operation on the planet, in the history of the planet. How little do we recall, remember Mena, Arkansas, and you remember, and Bill Clinton as governor of Arkansas welcoming George Bush's aid to make the deals with respect to the drugs that were smuggled illegally into Mena and then picked up by the Bloods and the Crips and the various gangs and taken to the streets of American cities and sold with 50% of the profit going for agency covert operations and 50% remaining with the gangs. America's had an ongoing large drug dealing operation of this sort. And look what we do to the characters who get pushed into that business in the streets and then incarcerated. In the southern states, we have perpetuated slavery, or at least indentured service, haven't we? Because what happens down there when you get sent to prison, or even to the county jails? I've spent time visiting a number of county jails and prisons in the South, and they rent that labor out. And it goes out, as it always went out to some of the plantations. They may be owned by corporations now rather than individuals, but they rent it out. It goes there. Those guys go out, they work every single day. They have no say about this. So if they're not slaves because they're not physically owned, they're at least indentured servants because they are in fact owned and they have a servitude to the state, for on behalf of the state. So that's not talked about. Not only are these places hellholes, but even their labor is not talked about and how that produces the kind of income that it does. So I think 9/11 exists in that context. It exists in the context of the whole range of executive orders that this president has signed. What you're doing here tonight and what your brothers and sisters in California picketing against Chevron may be doing tomorrow, or were doing last week, is a felony. It could be called a felony. They could arbitrarily pick you up, as they could pick up those people, because there is a relationship, particularly in terms of the Chevron people, to the economic reconstruction of Iraq. And if you do anything that harms the economic reconstruction efforts of Iraq, like stopping Chevron, which is a major bidder for the privatization of Iraqi oil, if you try to stop that, you are interfering with the reconstruction of that country. That's a felony. They can pick you up. They will take your house. They will take your cars. They will take all of your assets, and goodness knows what they will then do to you. That is where we an additional over 600 facilities that qualify presently for refurbishment for the same purpose. And the slight rationale is, well, if we get a huge influx of thousands and thousands of illegal immigrants, we got to have some place to put them. So we're going to build these camps in strategic areas of the country. Well, how many thousands of illegal immigrants are going to end up in Maine, are going to end up in Indiana, are going to end up in this state, Connecticut? Every state is targeted for these places. So that immediately begins to, even the most skeptical say, well, what's that all about? And if KBR has a $385 million contract as we sit here, you can bet the cost overruns on that will soon appear as they go on. Well, you know, a lot of people will say, a lot of historians, I know some historians will say, but you know, we've been through this before. This is a swinging of the pendulum to the right, and it'll swing back as it always has before. And they point to the Palmer raids and the arrest of Eugene Debs, and he was sentenced to 10 years, and Palmer raids resulted in hundreds of arrests. And after World War I was over, then they were released. What they don't say about that, of course, was that the Bureau of Intelligence and military intelligence before that were gathering files on black people in particular across the country, and those files remained right straight on down to the present day, because they regarded black people as being the best target for communist party membership, and of course the Russian Revolution had taken place. But World War I is over, so they're released, so that's okay. World War II, we incarcerated 110,000 Japanese. We put them in camps. When World War II was over, then they were released. So people will point to these kinds of situations. We had the McCarthy hearings, and then the Senate turned on Joe McCarthy, and eventually he was discredited. And all of that's true. But there is a qualitative difference now. There is a substantial material difference now. This is a perpetual war. This is not a war that's going to end. This is a war that's going to exist continually. And if there are incidents here or abroad that they can use to heighten anxiety and justify more expenditures, of course they will use them. And if, as you move closer and closer to more explicit types of fascism, they will be justified on the basis of the fact that we are at war. This president continues to say, we are at war. And it is a war that's not going to end, says Rumsfeld. And it'll go on well beyond our lifetimes. They're sowing the seeds for keeping a nation in a militaristic frame of mind, militarizing the culture at every level. Anyone who sees what's going on the streets of urban America sees a quantitative and qualitative change in the way the police are being trained to deal with problems in the streets. We are truly militarizing this society in an unprecedented fashion. And then we come to the next real war. Of course, you know that's Iran. Now there are people saying, no, there's no reason to invade. We really don't need to invade Iran. We can't handle it and all of that, and we shouldn't do it. Well, Nick Burns is Assistant Secretary of State for the Middle East, that region. And he had some quiet words with some colleagues of mine at Oxford. I convened a seminar on international human rights at Oxford University for 2 years before I took the time off to write a book on Hugo Chavez. And Burns was up there, and he spoke to some of my guys very candidly, and he said, I've been given until December 31st. And if I can't get them, if I can't do what Chris Hill did with the North Koreans, get them totally to back down, he said, then it goes to Cheney's boys, and we will be at war. Now, the time frames always, there are variables, and they always change, and maybe a little later than Burns was implying. If something is happening and El Baradi is jumping up and down saying, no, we need more discussions. But I think that war is probably inevitable. And I think the problem with that war that I have mostly is the impact on Venezuela. Because I believe the Venezuelan Bolivarian Revolution is the most important movement on the planet at the present time, on the basis of everything that I have seen going on in that country. And I'm afraid it's going to be endangered by the American attack on Iran. Now, the reason for that is because Chavez is a very personally orientated person, and he has developed not only working relations, commercial, governmental relations with the Iranians, but he's developed a personal relationship with Ahmadinejad. And he is very serious about that. Now, he has not thought through, I think, a lot of this. I'm just sharing this with you because it's not a big secret. I shared it with Nicolas Maduro, the foreign minister, is a very close friend of mine. When he spoke to the General Assembly, we spent 4 hours afterward going through these things. And I said, Nicolas, you really thought through what's going to likely happen here if your government, if Chavez withdraws oil from the United States, because that's what he has said publicly he will do. If America attacks Iran, Venezuela stops all oil from this country, which is a substantial amount of oil at this point. That's the provocation that America needs, in my view, to start shelling Miraflores, the presidential palace, and strategic targets in and around Caracas and the coast, and for the American troops in Colombia and their mercenaries to go and seize the oil installations in Maracaibo. And I think it'll be very difficult for that revolution to survive the kind of trauma that is likely to explode there. So I said, Nicholas, I've known Nicholas for many years. He was president of the National Assembly. He was a labor leader before that. And he's a wonderful young guy. And he's a heartfelt patriot. And by the way, the most interested public official, in my view, probably in all of South America, but it's certainly in Venezuela in terms of what you were doing. He has read everything. He has a vast library. He briefs the president continually. When Chavez met me in London, he asked me to explain to him some things about the movement here. Nicholas came back with more questions this time, and they're very supportive of trying to get the truth out about 9/11 because they suspect strongly this was the actions of a government that was determined to close the fist around the American population and its descent. So he, by the way, sends his deep regards and best wishes to all of you and to this movement because they do support you very much. You can consider Venezuelan support just a matter of commitment, I think, right to the end. So I said to him, Nicholas, you know, if this happens, what are you going to do? I know you bought 100,000 Kalashnikovs from the Russians, and you have these guys, you have militias that are well armed, but it's going to be a guerrilla warfare operation. It's going to be like the FARC in Colombia. He said, William, that's right. If we have to, we will, you know, he sounded Churchillian, you know, if we have to, we will do whatever we have to do. Iraq will be a picnic compared to what we will do to them if they try to come here. And I said, I don't think you understand really the full, not the ground force power, because they don't have that anymore, outside of the private armies that they're building. They're privatizing, you know, the armies, as you know, with lots of groups. But they have this technology, this missile technology, which just wreaks such havoc and such destruction. And I said, I don't want you to place me in a situation, Nicholas, at my age, where I have to form a Bolivarian support brigade up in North America and come down and finally end up in the jungles. And he looked at me and he laughed and he said, no, you should not have to do that. And listen to me. I know people over the years who talked about the Lincoln Brigade in Spain. And in my view, the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela is far more important to humanity than the Lincoln Brigade. So the next time you see me, if I'm not here for another year or so, the next time you see me, I may indeed be recruiting for the North American Bolivarian Brigade forces to come with me to Venezuela. As silly as that sounds, at some point people have to stand with those who were standing for us, really, in every way. So we have a diseased system, thoroughly diseased. And you know, when Martin King spoke in '67 at Riverside Church, he said, yeah, there was a pervasive sickness about the system. He was talking about Vietnam, of course. But it's gotten so much worse, hasn't it now? We have a seriously diseased, infirm system. I don't think there's any question about it. Corporate capitalism has to grow every quarter. They have to grow every single quarter. They have to try to sequester all of the assets of this planet. They have to try to grab and take and steal and barter, do what they have to do to get all of the assets of the planet. And it's now become a race between the Chinese and the Americans for the assets of this planet. The hell with the people to whom they belong. This has become a major power struggle. And that here is what drives this system insanely, whether it, of course, oil and energy, but it goes way beyond that. It's just every single asset one can think of. They need to acquire all of the value of the world. Now how, in the light of this, how do average people, how do citizens rally? How do citizens affect this kind of monolith when they're putting in place a legal structure that can take you away? And you may not see your loved ones again if it comes that bad. So how do we attack that? And I suggest to you that in many ways it is a race against time. And here we come back to 9/11. Because 9/11 is seminal. And this movement to save the Republic, to reconstruct the Republic, in my view, has to come from this movement. And I think it has that potential. As we go on, it has that potential. Now let me tell you how very specifically how and why. In New York City, there is likely to be a referendum, a ballot initiative put on the 2008 ballot, which will ask the voters of New York City, do you want to have a new independent commission that reinvestigate all of the events of 9/11. And in our view, that vote will be overwhelmingly yes. And so it is likely that there will be a commission formed, the city of New York, but it will consist of people from all over the world. It will have people of incredible integrity whose words will not be challenged. I mean, I'm speaking to people because I'm happy to be one of the people in the forefront of putting this together. I'm speaking to people like Desmond Tutu, for example, Lincoln Chafee from your neighboring state, who no, that way, sorry, Rhode Island, Chafee was incensed at what happened with the previous commission. He called it a farce. He said, "Bill, this is an absolute farce. I was ashamed to be a member of the government. Of course, I will do whatever I can do and join such a commission." So I think we're on the verge of putting that group together. Now, it will have subpoena power, which means nobody should escape its net. That's another example of a person on the commission, the fellow who opened your conference here this morning, Ed Asner. Ed Asner, an old friend of mine, has agreed to come on this commission. So I think that's the start. Now, what does that mean? We can hold hearings. They will subpoena people. There will be a staff, and there will be legal counsel. And it will probably run for about 2 years. And I think it's the kind of thing that C-SPAN will cover live, because that is right up their alley. Now, if C-SPAN covers it live, in addition to films that are made and all the rest of that, then that word is going to spread throughout the country and throughout the world. What the testimony is, what the facts are, what the investigation shows, and the investigation must go wherever it takes you, wherever it takes one, it must go. So to me, that's the brightest possibility of beginning to open up 9/11. Yes, you have to do the films. Yes, you must do lectures. Yes, you have conferences. Yes, you sing to the choir and all of that. But we need to have a formal proceeding such as this commission, and we don't need it, with respect to the most independent member of that august body, we don't need it supervised by the Congress of the United States. We can forget about the Congress of the United States. Democrats are not going to save this country, are they? You know, exactly so, and that's the way it's been. On K Street, every lobbying firm has two sides. They have a Republican side and a Democratic side. And when one party is in, the Democratic guys get rolled out, and Republicans are in, they get rolled. This is all the same. This is all the same old politics. Oh, Chuck Schumer, McCasey's friend, Chuck Schumer. Yeah. No, I'm afraid the likes of Chuck Schumer are not going to save us. There is concern in Washington. There is concern that the natives might be getting restless. Bush has deployed the Air Reserve from the 265th out of Orlando to Washington. And if you notice that, he sent them into Washington, so he now has troops at his command in the nation's capital. He did that after some of us, and I in particular at Cooper Union some while ago, he did it like within 30 days after that speech, called for what Dr. King desperately wanted to take place and why they really had to stop him, because it would have taken place. Not a march on Washington, but an encampment in Washington, where masses of Americans would simply go, and they would live in a tent city. And they would go every day, this was Martin's plan, up to see their Congress and their senators, try to get the money put back into the budget that had been taken out by the spending on the war. And they would just go up and back and forth and back and forth. And what was going to happen, so the military correctly analyzed, was that they were going to get very angry, increasingly frustrated and increasingly radicalized, because they're not going to get what they want. Now, when you have an angry mob of 500,000 people who are now becoming politically radicalized, they're not going to go away and go home, tuck their tails between their legs. The real possibility is that they're going to be organized into a major revolutionary force. And that spring, remember what was happening in France. There was virtually a revolution in France. The streets of Paris were not only alight with marches, but they came very close to a serious revolution in France, and they were very much aware of that. And so King, thinking about bringing 500,000 people into the nation's capital, posed a threat. They could never allow him to leave Memphis, Tennessee alive, because from Memphis he was going to Mississippi, and he was going to start the movement into Washington. They could not allow that to happen. They were very afraid, if that happened, that they would have a revolution, and they didn't have the troops to put down that revolution. Westmoreland at that point wanted 200,000 more for Vietnam. They didn't have those for him, and they didn't have the troops on the ground. And a revolutionary force would probably have seized the major organs of power, including the media, in the nation's capital, and held them. So it was going to become an insurmountable problem. Now that problem, brothers and sisters, can arise once again if the conditions are right. If the internal collapse of this economy, remember Clinton said, it is the economy, stupid. Well, it is the economy, and it's collapsing about us. If that keeps getting worse and worse, and the external stresses are as they have been and are becoming, it could very well be that we will be in a pre-revolutionary situation. Now, it might not be in my lifetime or many of yours, but you have to keep that possibility in mind, because in my view, as in the view of Mr. Jefferson, this country needs a serious reconstruction every 20 years. You know, Jefferson called for revolution every 20 years. They didn't teach you that in American history, but that was Mr. Jefferson's considered opinion when he saw the cronyism of his time already taking hold. So there's nothing wrong. Revolution is as American as apple pie. There's nothing wrong with revolution. Don't be afraid to talk it up. At some point, it may become a serious reality here. Now, in Cuba in 1959, a slightly built guy with fire in his eyes told a gringo kid baseball player from Columbia University that one day, he said, one day, the sleeping masses in our northern giant will awaken. He said, when that happens, the capitalist imperialist forces who seek the earth's treasures will come crashing down from that primary base. Now, he may have been paraphrasing Napoleon, who said the same thing about the Chinese. China's a sleeping giant. Let her sleep, for when she wakes, she will rock the world. But I don't know that he was. I think he was seriously, he was the most analytical of the three revolutionary leaders in Cuba, and I think he was seriously, and I was reading it carefully because of the translation. It was in Spanish, because the translation has to be precise when he talks about sleeping masses, not a sleeping country or government, but sleeping masses, because the American people have been anesthetized. They've been anesthetized by their schools, by their mass media, by their families who know no better, by their churches and temples. They've been anesthetized to accept the false vision of this country and its future, and its history. So I think if we see the situation through that kind of prism, see 9/11 through that kind of broader view, perhaps not in our lifetime, but maybe at long last the voices of the wretched of the earth will be the choir for this kind of change that America so desperately needs. With a song of peace, freedom, and social justice, and the familiar words of the wiry revolutionary ringing throughout the world, Hasta la victoria siempre. Thank you.